My name's Crystal Sandberg, and I'm a member of the local Chautauqua Planning Committee. I want to introduce our morning session. It's Women's Rights and the Saucy Mrs. Adams, and it's presented to us by Jessica Downing Ford. Jessica joins us from Grand Junction, Colorado, and it sounds like she's always had a love of performing, and she found a great connection with Abigail. She enjoys bringing Abigail to life for history classes in Western Colorado, as well as coaching students through the Young Chautauqua program with Colorado Humanities. Let's welcome Jessica.
Well, good morning. I'm so glad you joined me. Abigail Adams is one of my favorite topics. And I should start off by saying I'm originally from Massachusetts. I was born and raised in Braintree, Massachusetts, which factors heavily in Abigail and John Adams' story. It's nestled right between Weymouth, which is Abigail's birthplace, and Quincy, which is where they finish out their lives after John is president. And so I grew up steeped in all of this history, and like anything that you see every day, it just blends into the background, and it just kind of, you don't really see it anymore. And it wasn't until I went back to visit family. My son had just finished the 5th grade, and we're out and about. My dad lives downtown Boston. We go to Faneuil Hall to get, great treats. And my son is like, wait a minute. Is this Faneuil Hall? And I was like, yes. He's like, I just learned about this. So suddenly I had these new eyes. And that was where I rediscovered my love for Abigail Adams. Was at Adams National Park, which is the farm that John inherits from his father in 1761, and then also Peacefield, which they purchase when they return from Europe and where they finish out their days. It's an amazing national park. If you have a chance, I strongly recommend it. Pre-COVID, they used to do reenactments of the signing of the Declaration on the 4th of July. And so the year after my son's revelation of history, we went back and saw that reenactment. And a woman came out and she recited the Remember the Ladies letter. Who's familiar with that letter? Yes, probably Abigail's most well-known words. So that is where we will start today, because of course we love an excerpt, we love a headline, we love a bullet point, but there is much more to this letter than you might be familiar with. She knows that John is part of the committee to write the Declaration, and so she is asking, will he please remember the ladies? Will he do better than has been done before? She's asking, do not put such unlimited power into the hands of husbands. All men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. Now, I should tell you that John and Abigail have this remarkable relationship. And John really values her opinions and her wisdom. She's a smart cookie, as we would say in Massachusetts. And there is in this letter a little bit of jest, because who's in a marriage here where sometimes you got to throw a little comedy in there along with the poignancy, right, to keep the hackles down and to just kind of warm up the partner to an idea. She goes on, that your sex are naturally tyrannical is a truth so thoroughly established as to admit of no dispute. But such of you as wish to be happy willingly give up the harsh title of master for the more tender and endearing one of friend. Abigail refers to John as her dearest friend throughout their marriage, and that is how they sign letters to each other. And this is where the ask comes. Why then not put it out of the power of the vicious and the lawless to use us with cruelty and indignity with impunity? Men of sense in all ages abhor those customs which treat us only as the vassal of your sex. Regard us then as beings placed by providence under your protection, and in imitation of the Supreme Being, make use of that power only for our happiness. Now, John's response is sort of like saying, I hear you, but no way. Okay? As to your extraordinary code of laws, I cannot but laugh. We have been told that our struggle has loosed the bands of government everywhere, that children and apprentices were disobedient, that schools and colleges were grown turbulent, that Indians slighted their guardians, and Negroes grew insolent of their masters. But your letter was the first intimation that another tribe, more numerous and powerful than all the rest, were grown discontented. This is rather too coarse a compliment, but you are so saucy, I will not blot it out. So, he goes on to say that, we're only masters in theory. You really wear the pants in this equation, but John and Abigail's marriage was very different than what it was at the time. And when we talk about women's rights in 1776 versus today's idea of women's rights, it's kind of like comparing apples and unicorns, because we're not talking about the same thing. I do love this. How many people know that this starts the Remember the Ladies letter? As is often shown in history, abolition and women's rights run parallel. And this precedes the Remember the Ladies. I have sometimes been ready to think that the passion for liberty cannot be equally strong in the breasts of those who have been accustomed to deprive their fellow creature of theirs. Of this I am certain, that it is not founded upon that generous and Christian principle of doing unto others as we would that others should do unto us. Now, John and Abigail didn't own slaves. Abigail's father did. And actually, when he died, he freed them. And Phoebe was part of Abigail's whole life. And when she was freed, Abigail actually put her in charge of the house when she went to Europe. So Abigail and John always felt that slavery was a blight on the New World. They were very disappointed in it. And as you might remember, John Quincy Adams was the attorney in the Armstead that got them their freedom. Though none of the Adams family were formally considered abolitionists. Just a little aside there. So when we talk about women's rights in 1776, we're really talking about the law of coverture. And basically, even though we were fighting for our independence from Britain, we really were following all the laws of Europe. And so coverture basically dictated that a woman's subordinate legal status during marriage. In marriage, we become one person, we become the husband. And so let's look at the tenets of that law. You are unable to sue or be sued. on your own behalf. You cannot execute a will without your husband's consent. You have no control over real and personal property. No body autonomy. No rights to your children. You don't even own the clothes on your back. Okay? This is the time that Abigail is living in. And as we know, we are really, as humans, affected by the stories and the experiences that we share. And Abigail's family of origin was very loving. Her father was a minister. Her mother really, she was so giving. Abigail learned her acts of service from her mother, who really tended to the flock, the people in her husband's parish. There was a strong sense of unity and purpose to helping those less fortunate. So why does Abigail want John to do better? And what is this unlimited power, right? So in Abigail's family, I'll stop here. This quote, even in the freest countries, our property is subject to the control and disposal of our partners, to whom the laws have given a sovereign authority. Deprived of a voice of legislation, obliged to submit to those laws which are imposed upon us, is it not sufficient to make us indifferent to the public welfare? I'm trying to let him get his picture. All right. Yet all history and every age exhibit instances of patriotic virtue. Okay, let me stop there, because you're like, spell check didn't catch patriotic spelled that way? Abigail is a terrible speller. And when I quote her letters, I quote them as she wrote them. So there is no rhyme or reason to punctuation, grammar, run-on sentences, etc. But when I quote her directly, I try and leave it. Every now and again, spell check catches it without me. But instances of patriotic virtue in the female sex, which, considering our situation, equals the most heroic of yours. A late writer observes that as citizens, we are called upon to exhibit our fortitude. For when you offer your blood to the state, it is ours. In giving it, our sons and husbands, we give more than ourselves. You can only die on the field of battle, but we have the misfortune to survive those whom we love most. I just thought, as a mother, what a powerful sentiment in that. So, in Abigail's family of origin, there's the older sister Mary, younger sister Elizabeth, and then there is the family member who they frequently don't mention by name. I know there is in his disposition a strange mixture. There is benevolence and kindness without judgment, good sense without prudence, and learning without conduct. Early in life, that man might have been molded into a valuable vessel in the hands of a steady and skillful master. Let all remembrance of his connection with this family cease. By a total silence upon the subject, I would not add to his mortification or be the means of giving him a moment's further pain. My friends will do me a kindness by strictly adhering to this request. I wish him well and happy. So this is her brother William. And William marries this lovely woman, Catherine Louisa Salmon. Now, she's inherited some property from her family. But once they're married, the law of coverture says that property is William's. Which is all fine and good, except William is not good with money. He's not good in business. And he's alcoholic. So he is not making decisions that are best for the family and their longevity. He takes a loan from his dad and puts Louise's property up as collateral for this loan. So when he defaults, it becomes Reverend Smith's property. As I said, Abigail's family of origin, really loving. So it doesn't matter that this is the daughter-in-law. Reverend Smith is so accommodating and protective of her because the whole family sees what William is doing. But then Reverend Smith dies. Okay? The property is placed in like a trust. It has executors. It's there to support her and her family during the natural life of William. William dies young. And so Louisa and her 6 children get the use and income of the 261 acres of land, all the buildings, farm tools, and household items. And this is valued at 761 pounds. It's the largest inheritance when Reverend Smith dies. But she never gets her title back because the title passes from Reverend Smith to the executors to her male children. So the property she came to the marriage with is gone. And this is the relationship that starts for Abigail, this understanding of like, this isn't fair. Like, I'm really blessed in my marriage to John, but there are lots of women who aren't. So what about them? Now this slide I call Abigail's necessary rebellion because when we talk about the ways in which Abigail sort of bucks the law of coverture, it's not just to be obtuse. I mean, she's not trying to be difficult. She has a list of circumstances that are going to dictate a need for her to act differently than women before the revolution did. So we know that, in 1774, when John goes off to Congress, he no longer makes an income. There is no money coming in. Now, John's inherited farm has 40 acres. So they're able to support themselves in most endeavors, right? They can feed themselves. But there's no money coming in to pay property taxes or to buy fabric, to buy molasses, sugar, coffee. The Port of Boston's closed, so even if they could buy it, they probably can't buy it, right? Because it's just not available to them. In 1775, after the Battle of Bunker Hill, we see this huge uptick in men joining the militias in their hometowns. In fact, Abigail says there's hardly a man in town because they've all gone to join the militia. Now, they're also farmers themselves. So in the spare weeks and moments they get, they're working on their own property. So Abigail has no husband at home and 40 acres to tend to. And it's really hard to get reliable help. So in 1775, John's in Philadelphia, and Abigail, who knows this line, pins John, pins! Which doesn't seem like a big request, but so straight pins back in the day held your clothes together. They pretty much held the world together because we weren't working with zippers and buttons and snaps. It was pins. And so they were very necessary. And so she says to John, can you send me pins? And when he does, this starts a whole new role for Abigail in industry. In 1776, loan certificates, or what we know of as war bonds, are issued. And Abigail thinks, well, this is a smart investment to make. We need money, right? We're going to have a Continental Army. They need weapons. They need shoes. Many of those enlisting arrived without shoes. So our ragtag army needs some help. And so she starts purchasing loan certificates. Oh, but wait a minute. How can she do that as a woman? So she enlists her Uncle Tufts. His name is Cotton Tufts, one of my most favorite names. And he does her bidding throughout the course of her life. We have the smallpox outbreak, which will factor into the talk tonight that I give as Abigail. Of course, we have the Declaration of Independence in 1776, but we also have these enlistments that just keep taking the men. In 77, there's the ability to purchase paper money. And Abigail she really likes that. She has a vision. John likes to purchase land, but Abigail is like a real speculator with paper money. What? Okay, where'd you go? All right. It was on my end. It was user error. So then in 1778, John goes to France, and she begins her import business, which lasts until the war is over. And then Abigail decides land might be a good investment, since her business skills are no longer applicable for importation. So, Abigail is known for her letters. In the Massachusetts Historical Society, there are more than 2,000 letters that still exist of hers. So when I talk about Abigail and what she did that was different than women at her time, I am going directly to my favorite book, which is an anthology of the letters. So that first letter about pins, it's not even for her. She knows straight away, if she can get things from John in Philadelphia, there are people in Boston that need them, right? So this Hardwick, who, makes stockings, he needs needles. And John, he says, they'll know in Philadelphia what he needs. Can you send them? So she starts with pins. So that is part of Abigail's first sort of, I know that this is against the law, but I've kind of been left holding the bag here, John. She's also left in charge of 4 children. The letters between John and Abigail, in the best of circumstances, take 2 weeks. Okay? But John is serving the Continental Congress, which is an act of treason at this time. So there is no formal postal system. So the only way that they can pass letters is through colleagues and trusted friends. So when the smallpox epidemic breaks out, right after the British leave the port of Boston, Abigail's writing to John. Like, I'm worried, we've just barely survived dysentery, smallpox is happening, I'm worried about the children. There is a smallpox inoculation. John had it in 1764. It's part of why he can serve on the Continental Congress. They wanted people who had or were inoculated for smallpox. This is a pretty big problem in and around 1775 and 76. So Abigail's not getting word back from John. So she takes her whole family. She goes in, she stays with her Uncle Isaac in Boston, and she and the kids undergo inoculation. Dr. Bullfinch is our physician. Such a spirit of inoculation never before took place. The town and every house in it are as full as they can hold. I believe there are no less than 30 persons from Braintree. Now here's where she's, again, sort of defying this law of coverture. Because you remember, she doesn't have body autonomy, and she doesn't have rights over her children. But yet she says, I knew your mind so perfectly upon the subject that I thought nothing but our recovery would give you equal pleasure, and as to safety, there was none. So truly, she did not have the right to inoculate the whole family and herself. But she did it, because that was the circumstance she was left in, right? As to the problems with land, she had always had a field manager that would oversee basically a crew of farm hands. But we have no excess of men at all. So she gets really creative. Basically, she leases the farm in a sharecropping situation to these two recently married brothers so that they handle all the livestock except her own personal horse, and I think she maintains the chickens. She loves her chickens. But they take care of the 40 acres and the animals, and at harvest, they give her 50%. Again, I'm just going to say, smart cookie. And Cotton Tufts draws up this agreement, this sharecropping agreement. He continues to be how Abigail is able to step outside the confines of the law of coverture. And here's where Abigail writes John in Europe and says, I've thought of this, which I wish you to assent to order some saleable articles, which I will mention, to be sent to the care of my Uncle Smith, a small trunk at a time, containing 10 or 15 pounds sterling, from which I may supply my family with such things as I need, and the rest placed in the hands of Dr. Tuft's son, who has lately come into trade and would sell them for me. There is no remittance you can make me, which will turn a better account than goods, more especially such articles as I enclose a list of. But I believe a ship of war is the safest conveyance for them. Dr. Tuft's son has lately set up in trade. Whatever I receive more than is necessary for daily use, I can put into his hands, which will serve both him and myself. She loves a good win-win. She's a very industrious woman, and it matters to her, back to her original, upbringing with serving the members of the church. She really wants everybody to be okay. So this whole shipping thing, anyone catching maybe where this might be a little bit of a breach? They refer to it in their letters as articles for the family. This is the code word when Abigail sends her lists. Because, they're basically using ships of war to have personal gain in commerce. And John is worried because, of course, if letters are being lost, these trunks that he's sending are being lost as well. But Abigail says, if 1 in 3 make it, I'm coming out ahead. And sometimes, she's not looking for big things. This is not pieces of household furniture. We're talking like handkerchiefs, gauze, lace, feathers, linen, fabric, pins, tea, and teacups. So what John sometimes does is send them as gifts to traveling dignitaries, who then bring them to Abigail. But during the time of her selling goods, one of the Warren sons is also involved in this trade. And here's where she goes into the property in Vermont. So, Massachusetts, as is true to this day, has very high property value and high taxes. And so, as she's starting to think, this is 1782, about retirement, she's saying, what about if I buy some land in Vermont? What do you think about that? And he doesn't respond. So, don't read that yet. So she basically goes ahead and buys 5 pieces of land. She puts them in John's name and the name of all her children, because at that point, Nabby's still not married. So she can own property, because only married women can't. And that's how she gets around purchasing this property. The Vermont land doesn't pay out. Her speculation with war bonds and paper money is actually pretty financially rewarding. The land in Vermont, John Quincy Adams sells his, we don't know how much for, but nobody gets rich off the Vermont land. But it was her changing with the times. But then we also see in 1787, she's writing from Europe, saying you will continue to Dr. Tufts to procure notes as you find opportunity, till you invest the 200 pounds in them, which I wrote you about some time ago. She also says, what do you think of selling the house in Boston? Abigail has no right to sell the property in Boston. But she is trying to keep, if I can explain to you that when John starts into the service of his country, and we'll say 1774, it starts before that, but really in 1774, he takes his ability to make a livelihood with him out of the equation. In the first 20 years of their marriage, he's gone more than half of it. So Abigail is really left to figure out how to keep the family afloat, to pay the taxes, to keep the property going and producing. She learned so much about farming. She learned so much about husbandry. She continues to evolve with the times because John is forever thinking of this country first. And it is her job to think of her family first. So in all the ways that she sort of says, I don't care what your law says, I'm going to do this, it's not out of anything other than sheer necessity to keep the family afloat. So, the one thing that I want to talk about that is not covered in the law of coverture, but is super important to Abigail and is really important to women's rights, is education. So this, I see this on statues, etc. It's a well-known one from her. If we mean to have heroes, statesmen, and philosophers, we should have learned women. And she's writing to Mercy with that quote. It is really mortifying when a woman, possessed of a common share of understanding, considers the difference of education between the male and female sex, even in those families where education is attended to. All 3 of the Adams sons attend Harvard. Everybody attends Harvard at that time. But Nabby doesn't. That's their daughter. And she, although she is sent to school in Boston, it is not as formal as the boys. They all undergo preparatory lessons to be accepted to Harvard. They all graduate from Harvard. But even in Abigail's own home, there is a disparity. Even with a husband as wonderful as John, there is a disparity. And this is John's words. A different education by reason of her sex. It is scarcely reputable for young ladies to understand Greek and Latin. French, my dear. French is the language next to English. She continued to have Nabby tutored in Latin and Greek. And the agreement was that she would not let anybody know about it. That was sort of her concession. Like, okay, John, I'm going to do this, but we won't say anything about it. And Nabby understands it's kind of a secret. So in her last act of independence, she writes a will. And this is how it opens. I, Abigail Adams, wife of the Honorable John Adams of Quincy in the county of Norfolk, by and with his consent, do dispose of the following property. Now, first, that injustice may not be supposed to be done to my sons, I have conveyed to John Quincy Adams by deed, and then she also to Thomas Boylston. By this time, Charles passed. Charles died early, the middle son. So she gives them equitable resources. But then the rest of it, she gives to her female heirs. And this is important, I think, because, as she is industrious and creating some wealth for the family, she is also taking the extra and she's keeping it kind of aside. And she calls it hers, which is not allowed. But John knows that she has this money. Whether or not he understands how much money isn't necessarily clear. But when they buy Peacefield, she contributes the majority of the funds for this. It is her smart investing that gives them the money to purchase and then renovate Peacefield. So she says, this might amount to about $4,000. But at this point, Cotton Tufts has died, and she's not really sure, at the time of her death, what it will be valued at. But $4,000 in 1818 is a pretty healthy chunk of money. And she splits it up among her female heirs. Now, I give to my niece, Louisa Catherine Smith. This is the daughter of her brother, William. Louisa never marries. She lives with the Adamses through the remainder of their life. She really is so good to them and cares for them. And so she leaves the biggest portion of her estate to this niece. You can see what kind of things she's leaving. So, furniture, that would be personal property, right? Of which she doesn't have authority to give. Her clothing, which she has no right to under the law of coverture to relay to another woman, but she does. She says, I hope that no unkind or hard thoughts will be entertained, that I have given to Louisa more than the rest. But her case is particular. Having no relative upon her mother's side but a sister, I commend her to the kindness of my children. She was forever in service. She had pensioners her whole life. She was always telling Dr. Tufts, can you send a little extra to Mary and her husband Richard? Can you send a little to Elizabeth? She would send money for Phoebe, the freed slave that she gave property to and had managed the farm while she was in Europe. She had between 5 and 40 people who she would regularly give money to through the course of her life, and would try and do it in such a way that they didn't know that it was coming from her, wherever she could. because she knew people were proud. And so she would put a little extra on somebody's, firewood order or things of that nature. So John honors her will and executes the will, and therefore makes it legal under the law of coverture, because his love for Abigail, when she dies, he says that I could lay down and go with her. He doesn't really want to live without her. He lives like another 11 years after her, but he doesn't have the same vitality. Abigail softened his hard edges, as much as any one person can soften someone's hard edges. But the times when he is full of vitriol is the time that they're apart the most, when he's in Europe for the first 5-year stint, and then the majority of his vice presidency, she's not with him because of illness. But they had such a love affair, and I just think it's remarkable the ways in which, when circumstances call us out. Like I think of another amazing First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt. Sometimes we don't know how strong we are until, we're put in hot water, and then we realize it. And that was Abigail. She rose to the challenge of her times. She kept the farm going, kept the kids educated, kept continuing to grow. The Adamses were not wealthy. They're not in the same plane as the Washingtons by any means, but they were very comfortable, although you would never know it the way Abigail talks about it. But she worked really hard to make sure that she could do well by her family and by her community. And that was how Abigail did her little part for women's rights during the Revolutionary period. So I'd be happy to take any questions if you have any on this. Yes?
Do you have a favorite historical novel about Abigail Adams?
Do I have a favorite historical novel about Abigail Adams? I do not read historical fiction as it relates to the Adamses because I don't want to confuse. But I will tell you, the first biography that I ever read was Woody Holton's Abigail Adams, A Life, which is probably still my favorite, and I don't know if it's maybe because it was the first, but then I never stopped reading. I have students that ask, how long did you research Abigail? And it was like, this is on my bedside table right now. It's a new publication, The Unexpected Abigail Adams, A Woman Not Apt to Be Intimidated by John L. Smith. It's a really great read. And, it's not every day that there's a new biography about Abigail. So whenever I find one, I pretty much devour it. But those, I would say, are two of my favorites. Reading her letters is not always easy because of the misspellings and also the language of the time. But there is something about being able to turn to, like, how she felt about the 4th of July.
And who wrote that?
This is, it is accumulated by Edith Gellis. She is the foremost Abigail historian. She's written several books, which are also excellent. I mean, for a narrative, I really like the Woody Holton, but she's written Portia, which is a pen name that Abigail uses with John. And now I'm spacing out on the other ones. But, Abigail lived this incredibly rich life where she has the opportunity to go to Europe and she gets to meet King George. That was not happening to most women. in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1786. So she has that opportunity, which she brings Nabby with her because she figures that's the best education she could give her, right? It's to take her to Europe and have her experience that. But then she also is our first second lady and second first lady. They're the first inhabitants of the White House. And so, I've done several monologues of her because you can't fit that whole life into 40 minutes. It's like trying to turn, I'm wondering how they're turning the Iliad into a 2-hour movie. How are you going to do that? It's the same sort of thing. Her life is so rich that I can and will perform as her until the day I die because there's so many words that I am yet to utter as her. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm curious. You do this comparison with the Washingtons in terms that they don't have as much as these people. But surely there were a lot of people who didn't have the land holdings or the support of male relatives who could legally act on their behalf. So what are other wives and widows at this time doing? Or I know that's not necessarily your field of study. Are there some resources or
So the great question is, Abigail had some things in her favor, but what about the women that didn't have that didn't have farmland, that didn't have male relatives to do their bidding? And the answer is the disparity of wealth, although not at all like was being experienced in Europe at that time, there was a lot. Women whose families did not own property, when their husband enlisted, if they didn't have family that they could go live with, they became camp followers and followed the Continental Army through all the trials, tribulations, terrible weather, famine, etc., etc. Talk about industrious. Those women frequently, if the husband died, then they figured out how to make it work in the Continental Army. And they would, the Molly pitcher that she went around and gave water to all the soldiers on the battlefield with her pitcher of water. Then there were the women that took up the guns, that would load the cannons when their husbands were killed. They took in washing. They administered medical treatment. And there was indeed prostitution in the camp followers of the Continental Army. So as far as what they did, we have even less knowledge because women without education are not writing letters and journals. And so a lot of that is speculation as to how they survived. But certainly great difficulty calls out great virtue. Abigail says that to John Quincy Adams, and that is true in all ages. When women are faced with a way to support their family, they find a way.
Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. I want to encourage you to fill out an evaluation, and you can find the QR code on the front of our program, or if you don't want to use the QR code, we have some written opportunity. There's forms in the back that you can fill out and fill that out for Jessica. And the other thing I really want to encourage you to do, come back this evening. Come back and meet Jessica as Abigail. We'll hear the real story from Abigail. But just a few minutes to stretch your legs. Use the restroom if you need. There's the restrooms are just to the right as you come in the front door. I don't ever think it's too early to start thinking about lunch. And we're having a great food truck. 2 smoking grills are coming, and they'll be out back. So start thinking about your lunch plans and the opportunity to get lunch there. So take a few minutes and stretch, and we'll come back and hear Taylor King.